Welcome back to Crystal Harbor, where last time we built this new high-density sort of second downtown area. But while building it, we left this area over here empty, and that's because in this episode I'm gonna build a zoo here. The other downtown area already has a zoo, but it's pretty small with just a few little areas. So I want to make this zoo a little bit bigger, and this can be kind of the main city zoo. And after I build that, I will also build a little nature reserve or park or just something similar over here in these mountains. I'll probably expand the parts of it all the way up to this coast up here. And this park over here, I'm hoping it can turn out a little bit similar to this large one over here, just on a little bit of a smaller scale. With some nice rocks everywhere, with some paths, some lookout points, sort of like this one with a nice view of the city. I will start off with the zoo. Let's begin by building that. So yeah, building a zoo. I first just start out by placing the main gate and some cafes and souvenir shops next to the entrance of it. Then I move on to experimenting with some layouts, and I immediately realize upon placing my first big building that I will have a bunch of issues with the terrain, because I hadn't noticed this before, but the zoo is actually on a little bit of a slope. So I try to level out the terrain to fix it, but that really just doesn't work that nicely. So I end up just leaving it as is and building it on the terrain with these ridges everywhere. I mean, I do fix these ridges later by just hiding them with some detailing, and it ends up looking pretty okay, but I was not expecting this build to be so difficult, honestly. I was really just expecting this build to be a nice, quick and easy zoo.
I wanna know, can we talk about me and you?
I tried to fit in as many different animal enclosures as I could, just to make the zoo as big and nice as possible, and you can also see that I removed the road that was going along the coast below the zoo, just so I could fit in a bit more. Of course, I built this road back later, but I built it back in a little bit of a different shape, because the zoo ended up expanding a little bit more outwards than I initially thought. So now I have placed all of the buildings for the zoo, and it's time to move on to detailing it. As you could see in the time lapse, it had a little bit of elevation, this whole area, and so there's these really ugly kind of ridges everywhere, especially like over here and along this road, so I need to find a way to cover those up as well. And yeah, we'll also just add some benches, some signs, some detailing, basically, some stuff like that. So let's do the detailing now. Now, there wasn't really that much detailing that I could think of doing for a zoo like this, because most of the assets in there are already quite detailed. But, well, the first thing I did was fence in the entire zoo area, because we don't want anyone entering the zoo without a ticket, of course. And I mean, zoos are usually fenced in IRL as well, so I guess it's realistic. Then I just added a couple of cafes with benches with some signs. I also placed signs at basically every single attraction around the entire zoo. And here's another kind of cafe area with this park next to it as well. But the main goal for the detailing was to hide all of those ridges. And I basically just did that by placing a bunch of trees. I also used this rainforest asset, which hid all of the ridges quite well without using big trees. And yeah, I think it ended up turning out pretty nicely.
Sometimes, don't know why I feel that way sometimes. Yeah. The end. Think how we can set it on the weekend. Funny how I kinda like this life. Funny now I kinda like this life. I like this life.
And now the zoo is done. I mainly just used some of these rainforest assets and just regular trees to cover up these ugly edges that we had everywhere, and now you can barely tell that they were there. You really have to look for them, so I think that's a success. And the zoo looks pretty nice in my opinion. I like it personally. But now it's time to move on to the next part of the episode, which is building this park over here. So with placing the paths of this nature reserve, my main goal was basically to just visit all the best areas of the terrain. That means all of the high points and also some of the flatter areas where I could place some attractions later on. And also my second goal was to respect the topography of the whole area, and that's why I'm doing these zigzags up the mountains so that the path isn't too steep. Of course, if I just place it up the side of a mountain like this, the path is also gonna be on a very severe angle, so I also have to flatten it out in the other direction. And I ended up using just the regular dirt path instead of the nature reserve path, same as in my other big nature reserve. And the reason for that is that the nature reserve path actually flattens the terrain below it, and it just doesn't really look that nice if you're doing all of these switchbacks and tight turns and stuff like that. It just ends up being kind of a mess. So I end up using these regular dirt paths and building up to all of the high points.
Ich will, dass du weißt, ja, die Liebe am Marsch und die Herzen sind kalt. Ja, ich bin heute allein und doch sag ich dir eins: gib das hier jetzt auf, denn wir sind nicht mehr zwei. Hab mich grad verliebt und doch war ich dir fern. Gib's mir einen Hieb und ich sehe einen Stern. Es brennt noch das Licht, doch es ist weit entfernt. Die Liebe vergibt, doch ich fühle den Schmerz. Ich will dich nie mehr sehen, ja, ich werde es nie verstehen. Warum willst du von mir gehen? Es kann dich nicht alles um dich drehen.
And now with the paths placed, it's time to add some points of interest, like lookout platforms, some hunting shacks, some stuff like that. Maybe even some bigger rock formations that people could stop to have a look at. Yeah, so for the points of interest, I start off by placing just some lookout points of some nice views of the city, as well as some views of the nature reserve itself. And I'm also clearing out some trees that are in the way of the view, just to make it a little bit nicer. Next I end up building these kind of tent towns. There will be 2 of them. This is the first one, with some fishing huts and a bunch of attractions in there as well. Also in the middle of this I just quickly place a kind of main building at the entrance of the nature reserve. And back to building this tent town. My method for building this is pretty simple. I just place a campfire in the middle and then a bunch of tents around it. I also detailed these areas with some toilets and a well as well, and also just a place to store some firewood, as well as some nature reserve signs as well. I end up building 2 of these little tent areas. In my opinion, building areas like this just gives the whole nature reserve some life, I guess you could say. Because you could have a nature reserve with just some paths and not really much else, but that would just be boring. We need to have something for the citizens to visit and to have fun at. And here at the end I'm just adding a few more rocks to make this area look a little bit more interesting. And afterwards I just move on to the second kind of tent town on this ridge here. And the method I use for building this one is pretty similar. Also just a campfire in the middle and a bunch of tents around it. But for this place I also place a hunting shack in there. But the idea is that it isn't a hunting shack, but instead it's kind of the main building of the tent area that people can visit, and maybe there's some food inside or a visitor center or something like that. I'm not really sure. And now with most of the points of interest placed, it's time to add some actual vegetation, because this vanilla one doesn't really look that nice. I want this forest to be way more dense, with way more trees, and also I want these steep cliffs here to have some rock faces, kind of like over here, something similar. So yeah, let's begin work on that. Yeah, as I just said, I had 2 main goals. The first one was to make the forest way more dense, and then the second one was to add some rocks on the cliffs to make the cliffs look a little more realistic. To make the forest more dense, it was pretty simple. I just spammed a bunch of trees everywhere basically. It took quite a while, but it ended up being worth it, because the whole area looks way nicer with the forest being way more dense. And I will explain how I did the rock area when we get to that.
Season, can't wait for a single reason not to say goodbye. Oh, if I said what's on my mind, would you stay with me tonight? If I said what's on my mind, would that make you run and hide? Run and hide. Run and hide. If I said what's on my mind, would that make you run?
So yeah, now I'm just starting to place a bunch of rocks, and I'm actually using the vanilla rocks here. So anybody can do this without any mods, and the method I'm using for placing them is basically I'm going to do these 3 or 4 types that you can see me select in the bottom, and the only thing I'm doing is while I'm placing them, I'm just spamming my mouse button to place them, and at the same time I'm holding the right click as well, which rotates the rocks. And I find that this is a pretty good way to rotate them in a random direction and for them to not look repetitive on the side of the mountain. So I'm basically just holding down right click and spamming the place button at the same time. And at the end here I also add a bunch of bigger boulders on the side of the cliffs as well, just to make it look a little more realistic as well.
I love the fact I didn't let her go. She loves the fact that I just let her know. Now we're together, it's a different mode. We getting crazy in a different role. We getting crazy in a different role. She loves the fact that I just let her know.
And now this nature reset was done as well. I really like the way these cliff faces look. I mean, they are definitely better than vanilla. And I had a choice, I could either do light colored cliff faces like this, or darker ones like I did over here. I'm not really sure which ones I actually preferred, but I ended up going for the light colored ones, and I think it fits the area pretty well. The more dense forest also really helps out the look. You can zoom in and you can really see how this area would look if you were walking through it. Just a nice little path through the forest with some mountains in the background with some rocks inside the forest as well. Yeah, it's pretty nice in my opinion. We have 2 main camping, kind of tent cities, I guess you could call them. One is over here and one is over here, by the water, with some fishing options as well. But yeah, with the zoo and this nature reserve done, that will be it for this episode. In the next one I will probably expand throughout this area with some more mid-rises and low density buildings. And yeah, that will be it for this one, and see you in the next one.